I'm delighted to introduce our colleagues who are presenting, Dr. Anne Casson and also Miss Anne Pittaway, on this, The Faith in the Nexus, how do adults nurture children's spirituality in church toddler groups?
Okay, I'm going to pick up from there, Bob, and I'm going to give a little bit of the background here, and then Anne's going to go on and share the findings, and then Ronnie's going to come on and share a little bit about some of our findings as well. So, for some of you, this might be old hat, but just to go over some of how we did this in the first place. In autumn of 2022, which is just last year, that we undertook a mixed methods qualitative research study exploring the spiritual flourishing of very young children in church toddler groups. Now, we have visited and engaged with several church toddler groups or initiatives over the course of the research. It was actually broken down into 3 phases. Phase 1 involved observation and informal conversations with leaders, volunteers and parents in 4 toddler groups, mainly in the North East Midlands, London and the South East. Now, analysis of these findings highlighted the need for an in-depth study, employing a variety of methods. For any further information on these findings, we can share with you a link to an open access article that we published sharing those findings. Phase 2 consisted of an in-depth study of 3 inclusive church toddler groups in the southeast of England. They were all situated within church premises, but the faith component varied from implicit to explicit in messaging and activities. Now, we did quite an intense study here. Each group was visited 4 times by 2 or 3 researchers at the time. And the research team trialled a variety of research methods. We faced some inevitable challenges going into toddler groups and trying to do research. The length of the sessions, most of them 90 minutes long, once a week, changing attendees. Some came every week, some were less regular. The noise and busyness of the toddler group environment, and also young parents' busy lives. And we decided at times to pull back a little bit because that time was so precious to the parents when they were in those groups that we didn't want to intrude on their time with their children and engage in play with their child. So in the end, we came to the conclusion the most fruitful methods were one researcher focused on detailed observation of the children, sometimes one child, sometimes a group of children, and the other researcher in the group was engaged in informal conversations with adults in the room, with parents, the volunteers, the leaders, and the clergy when they were there. In phase 3, which is the bit that we've been just doing this term, we've undertaken further consultation and investigation of other initiatives, as particularly initiatives that intentionally pay attention to the nurturing of the spiritual well-being of young families. Now, what we've done going to present on today is the 3rd of our research questions. We have the first one was, what does the spiritual flourishing look like among very young children? And we're in the process of writing a report up on this. The second one was, how do church toddler groups support spiritual flourishing? And the third one is the one we're going to focus on today, is in what ways do adults within these groups support the spiritual flourishing of very young children? I just realised, Anne, I'd ignore the slides. Thank you. So we're going to look at adults. What do the adults within church toddler groups? But before we do that, why focus on church toddler groups? Well, we know research has shown that the research of people like Lisa Miller and Deborah Shine, who's here, has shown the importance of spiritual nurture from a very young age. We know within the Christian tradition, the family is the primary educator of the child. And the influence of family on religious socialization is well documented within the research. However, what we've found is with the institutional church, there's a general lack of attention to the nurturing of young families' spiritual well-being or faith. That became very apparent in the limited or lack of response to the spiritual needs of young families in the COVID pandemic. There was a lot of reaction of the churches, but the most neglected area was the children's ministry. But there are vital points when the church does pay attention to young families. Rites of initiation, baptism, First Holy Communion in the Catholic tradition, Sunday worship. And increasingly we're finding in the Anglican tradition, this has come out through our other primary project, which we're just also writing a report on at the moment, different expressions of church, the messy church, intergenerational activities. But actually, the most relevant here, the informally in church toddler groups. Recent research by the Anglican London Diocese has highlighted this is the most common activity in which churches engage with young families. So, it was obvious we needed to engage with church toddler groups. They're common to all the churches across the denominations, and they reach out to non-church families and families on the margin, which is a really important part of the whole of NICER research. There's also a neglected area of academic research. There's lack of research in children's spirituality in this sort of field which sort of overlaps spirituality, faith. For those who are not familiar with church toddler groups, and I know we've got some people on the call not from the UK, but basically the groups are midweek stay and play sessions, usually held in a church or church hall, run by volunteers, occasionally paid children's workers from the local church community. They are primarily a community resource with an open invitation to families in the local area. They are not specifically for Christian families. All the ones we've visited and encountered, it's an open invitation. And they are popular. They're popular with parents. They provide support for new parents, and they also provide a point of connection to other families. So they're a really valuable resource. And one of the things we were saying, what do we need to get out in our report, is how important church toddler groups are and the work they are doing, which is much neglected. Another little bit of just explanation. What do we mean by Christian spiritual flourishing? Now, we've had some trouble with defining this and working in this area, because we are talking about Christian spirituality and we mean Christian spirituality within the church, and we've defined it as rooted within relational, expressed in self-understanding and meaningful relations with others, nature and the transcendent. You can see here we're picking up hey and nigh language, but it's a dynamic state of being. And it's about living life to the full, John 10:10. So it's rooted within the Christian tradition, but it's bringing in the ideas of spiritual nurture as well. It's underpinned by the view that all human beings are spiritual beings. And we've drawn on the biblical work, church traditions, and the work of Buber, Fisher, Hay, and Nye to root it in flourishing in the physical and spiritual connections between humans, nature, and God. So that's where we've rooted it. One of the issues we've encountered, and one of the issues we're trying to write up in the report now, is that confusion between and conflation of religion and spirituality. What do we mean by faith? What do we mean by spirituality? A way that we've worked around it is to say both can be held in balance if we view children as spiritual beings first, who are socialized into a religious tradition with their own expressions of spirituality. So we can accept both of them. I'm just moving on to our method. So we're looking a little bit at phase 2 of the project. We used a variety of research methods. We had a wonderful thing with using a Padlet system where each time the researchers came back from their meeting, they could write up what went well, what would be better, and what we don't do again. So we had a quick evaluation of the methods as we were going through to work out what was the most important, what was actually valuable. And as I said before, we decided in the end, where we had 2 researchers in the group, and each time we had 2, sometimes we had 3. One researcher focused just on the child. Sometimes that was doing interventions with the child. We took story sacks in sometimes, and sometimes that was just observing, following a child around the toddler group. The other researchers spent the time with the adults. Sometimes we got so involved we were actually helping make cups of tea and everything else as well, but that's when we got the best conversations coming out of it with people, because very early on, if you've been in a toddler group, you get accepted as a member of the group, and people were very open with us. We're in the process of finalising an analysis of the data and writing up a report. We've got to get it drafted by the end of next week, and hopefully it will be out in the spring. So it will be really interesting to see as we pull this together, and hopefully then do some further dissemination on the importance of toddler groups. But I'm going to stop now and hand over to Anne. I'll take over the slides, Anne, if you do the chatting. Anne, you mute.
That would help if you could hear me. Sorry. So the findings: church toddler groups provide space and time for the nurturing of the spiritual flourishing of young children, both unintentionally and intentionally. We also found that they function as a nexus, bringing together young families and the church community, and they really are an invaluable community resource. So just moving on from that and looking at some of the different findings that we observed when we went in. When visiting the toddler groups, the research team found evidence of often unintentional nurturing of spiritual flourishing. We saw opportunities of spiritual flourishing through the environment itself. Some of the toddler groups, for instance, were held in lovely traditional churches with magnificent stained glass windows. We also found opportunities provided through the provision of toys and activities that prompted imaginative play between the children and their families. Children could also see through the business of their group, we could also see that children were completely drawn into the world of their own. They were in the here and now, and no matter what was going on around them, they were there. They were there in that moment, and no one was going to take them from that. They were absolutely absorbed and fixated. Children showed particular interest in loose parts play, using these resources to shape their own creative play and their adventures. Some of them would take them off, they'd start stacking. You can see in some of the pictures there's little fluffy balls and there's stones and things like that. We'd find them in pockets, we'd find them in carts, but we definitely would see in some instances they were really concentrating on them and they were going into their own world, their own imagination. And that was just as important as the activities that were provided and the tasks that were provided. Could we just move on to the next one, please? Interactions with others also gave children a sense of community and belonging. Some activities were set up to exchange sharing amongst each other and engagement with adults. Role modelling from adults helped not only the children, but also the parents. One parent said that when she was watching the toddler group leader deal calmly with other children, it really did help her in her own parenting. And there were a couple of instances where parents would actually say, you know, I wished I had the disposition of that leader there, and I looked to her for, you know, evidence of and ideas of how to parent my own children. So it was particularly important, not only for the children, this role modelling, but for the parents that were arriving as well. The role modelling of Christian values such as compassion, hospitality, a listening ear were all valued by the families that were attending the toddler group. One minister noticed relationships are the starting point of faith. What we did not see much engagement with was nature and the use of the outside space. Now, this tended to be because some space was not available and other spaces were just not safe for use. Where we did have examples of children engaging with nature, it was powerful and it was engendering moments of awe and wonder amongst the children. As a research team, we would take activities into the toddler group and to aid engagement with the children, we would actually bring in story sacks, we would bring in loose play parts, all sorts of things. And one activity was to bring in nature, to actually bring nature from the outside into the group itself. And we did this in forms of leaves and acorns, conkers and twigs. And to be honest with you, it was like a magnet when the children saw this. Children and parents came over to this. We were doing leaf rubbings. And one of the boys here, one of the 3-year-old boys, when he was looking for the leaf under the paper, he just automatically went, "We're gone." And then there was this small moment of wonder when the image appeared on the paper. And then mum started to share with her child as they were doing this activity, how she used to do that as a child. And it engendered those sorts of conversations. Really brilliant activity we found that this was. Next slide, please, Anne. Most of the leaders and volunteers and clergy often seemed unaware of the opportunities to nurture spiritual flourishing through the environment that was surrounding them or the free play activities that they'd put on. Spiritual flourishing was understood to happen in the planned section of the session, handed over to Bible stories, worship songs, and related activities. This section, if it was included in the session, was perceived as missional in nature. And this led us as a research team to question what adults themselves perceived their role to be in the group.
I move on and pick up there. What did adults perceive their role to be within the group? Anne?
Yeah. So we asked the leaders, volunteers and clergy how they nurture spiritual flourishing. And in their response, they tended to focus on faith encounters through scripture. In 2 of the groups, there was a routine of stopping for a Bible story. These were often told by one of the volunteers with the aid of a puppet. This was a time that allowed children and parents to come together. Some of the parents listened attentively, actually, to the Bible story, and I think some of them had never come across that story, so it was the first time they were hearing it. In the 3rd group, the leader and local vicar had decided not to have a Bible session, in fact, not to have anything that was explicitly Christian. And by explicit, they meant we don't have a section of the toddler session for worship songs and Bible stories, said the minister. He argued that an explicit slot each week for Bible stories could communicate the idea that faith can be compartmentalised. It could also act as a barrier, as people do not know the language and can often feel uncomfortable with that language. So they were very clear that they were not going to have that as part of their session. Initial reflections from the researchers on the Bible input in these groups was threefold. 1, researchers observed it was a time that the children were less engaged in the session. And 2, a message transmitted by most of the adults was that this time of faith and spiritual nurture of the child was the time that it actually happened. The free time, the coming together for drinks and snack, that wasn't spiritual nurturing. So the rest of the time was just free to chat. And thirdly, it reinforced the perception that faith and spiritual nurture is something that has to be undertaken by people in the know, professionals and experts. In conversations with the adults, a variety of reasons were offered as to why they were in the group in the first place. And for parents, there was a focus on the social side. They came for the company for themselves as much as for the children. And some of them related back to COVID, when they felt that they'd been isolated and they'd missed that social contact. When pressed as to why they were coming to a church toddler group, many shared how welcoming they found the group and how they appreciated the care and hospitality shown to them, and how they spoke of a feeling of community and a sense of belonging. Many of the volunteers saw their role as a service to the church and often prefaced their reply with, well, I just make the teas or I just put out the toys. And in fact, many of these, mainly older ladies, offered an invaluable service. They weren't just anything. They were absolutely crucial to this group and to the young families, welcoming them, chatting with them, developing relationships and engendering a sense of belonging amongst the small community there. The clergy and leaders often focused on the pastoral care. They offered a listening ear and signposted parents to local support, such as food banks. For some clergy leaders, the toddler group was seen primarily as a missional opportunity. They regularly offered invitations to church events such as the Teddy Bears picnic in the park, a family Sunday worship service or messy church. Some of the clergy mentioned that occasionally parents would ask about baptism for their child, And if you look on the slide there, you can see 3 ministers that were spoken to who had slightly different approaches to their engagement with the toddler group. So I'll just leave that there for a moment so you can read that. What we did find that all 4 groups, the parents, volunteers, leaders, there was a focus on relationships. That's what drove the toddler groups, the relational, and the engendering of a sense of belonging. That was very important to all of them. And I'll hand back over to you, Anne.
If I pick up on some of the things we are looking a little bit further into in our discussion elements, the tension between faith and spirituality. There is an underlying tension between what's faith, what's spiritual development, and there's a need for a more holistic approach in this area. Now, some of this came down to what the individuals saw as the purpose of the church toddler group. Many saw it, it's just a missional outreach to the parents, but actually the valuable sense of nurturing the spiritual well-being of the child is really important. Also, for adults, what does the word spirituality mean to them? This concept of spirituality as separate from religion or faith is relatively new, and many without faith struggle to define what they meant by spiritual. I'm spiritual, but not religious. It becomes a vague, so it's sometimes meaningless term. One of the key concerns we had is the separation of the play element from the God, some of them called the God slot. We've just got we've just do a Bible story and that's where it all happens. Well, actually, no, it happens throughout the whole toddler group, and we need to get that message across. There seems to be considerable unawareness on the part of adults, generally, of how children experience and share spirituality. And for these toddler groups to function at their best, exploring that concept would be hugely beneficial. And what I mentioned before, some of the volunteers just did not recognise the significance of their role and the value of their role within the group. The I Just people, I'll share a poem at the end, which we've pulled up, which is really interesting. But actually, we need to bring across the value of the volunteers, of what they're actually doing, of how they are ministering to these young families. So there is a need for a more holistic approach. And I'm going to hand over to Ronnie now to share some of the things that we saw which are really important.
Thanks, Anne. One of the concepts that we were looking at is an expression for something that you'll all be aware of. I'm just going to explain what we mean by a moment of ordinary grace, which sounds incredibly highfalutin, but is actually, it's something that you will all have experienced. A MOG, as we call them, is one of those moments when something happens between you and a child that takes you into the child's spiritual world, and you can both pause. If you read through one of the earlier slides, there was a brilliant moment when a little child was completely caught up looking at what looked like a stained glass window, but that actually turned out to be a cobweb. But the adult thought that the child was looking at the window. It was the child who said, no, I'm looking at the cobweb. But the child was transfixed, and in that transfixing moment, took the researcher in with him. And I think that is a MOG. It's one of those moments where you think, I just want to stay here because this is lovely. It's a real pause in our lives. I think MOGs are what keep people working and ministering with children. That's why teachers do it. It's for those amazing moments when children suddenly, not consciously usually, let you into their world and you have a moment of real spiritual grace. Is a wonderful expression. So that there's a real need for adults to recognize these moments and to allow ourselves to go into them. I was thinking about it this morning, and I think when Jesus said we need to become like children, one of the ways we can understand that is we need to be able to slip into those extraordinary moments of largely awe and wonder with children of this age, but just to allow ourselves to go in there and not reply, well, we need to clean the cobweb down because it looks dirty, but yet to go into the cobweb moments and see where it's taking the child and how we can be really blessed by very small children and slightly older ones. So we need to develop those environments where awe and wonder become more regular. I'm a huge believer in taking children outside if we can for any reason. Wrap them up warm. But I mean, I don't know where you are today, but in my part of the world, the sky was so blue. It was just stunning. It was really awesome. And if we can just notice moments like that, we can let the children take us into awe and wonder and just stop all our mad dashing about. So it's really important that we recognise MOGs and we recognise the conditions for facilitating MOGs and for noticing them. And I was in charge of some toddler groups when I was a curate a very long time ago, and just sharing with the lovely volunteers that I had there, let's just take time, if the children are inviting us into their moments, to go in with them, because that way we're saying to the children that these moments are really, really important, and to thank them for letting us go there with them, because adults are not very good at recognising MOGs, but children are. Thank you, Anne.
I think it's me picking up now with some of the conclusions. The research team found evidence that church toddler groups do provide opportunities for these spiritual moments. And observations of these groups and the involvement in the, it's 2 years now we've been involved with church toddler groups, communities, and conversations with parents and helpers have led the research team to conclude that church toddler groups are an invaluable resource, that they are filling a noticeable gap. They provide inexpensive spaces for parents and children to play and engage with other parents and connect to the local community. Just collecting the quotes from the parents, I think, is enough to show the importance of these groups to the parents. And we have evidence that they do nurture the spiritual flourishing of young children. But we know that much more is possible to enhance this. To realise the full potential, we argue that there needs to be a greater awareness of the value of church toddler groups for young families. There needs to be resource input, not things, but networking relationships for volunteers and leaders to support them in their work. And there is then the potential for church toddler groups to act as a crucial nexus for young families, connecting the families better with the local community and with the church community. And we're going to hand over now to Anne for some questions, but if you've got any questions, please either put them in the chat or raise a hand. I think, Jill, we need to let people's microphones off to hear people's questions.
So yes, as Anne said, I mean, there was quite a lot there that we have presented, and it may be that you have questions of us. But we're taking this opportunity as well to learn from you this afternoon, that we know and we realise we've got a lot of expertise here that I know could actually support us in some of the questions that we're looking at in this research. We've got 2 or 3 questions. And if your mics are released, that would be great if you would respond verbally. But if not, just put in the chat, because we will pick up there as well. But our first question for us is, how do you think adults can be supported in nurturing the spiritual flourishing of young children? And if you are someone that does work with children, have you got examples of this happening? So at the moment we're on this question, or obviously if you've got questions of us, just raise the question and we'll get a discussion going.
I'm quite happy to start that if you want. Really sorry,
yes.
everyone, I arrived late because I've been working. Yeah, so I work with young children. I work with young children every day, which is where I've been this morning.
Mm-hmm.
How do I, and part of my job is supporting the adults as well in nurturing that flourishing within schools. It's not necessarily spiritual flourishing, but I think that is within the widest context. I think for me, it's about giving space, actually encouraging adults to not jump in. I think sometimes, and I think more and more, I'm seeing when we hold silence, when we hold that space of, I loved what you were just saying earlier around the curiosity, the awe and wonder, and when we hold space for children to be curious and not to feel that temptation that we've got to jump in with lots of questions necessarily. I think feeling comfortable with the silence, there's real value in that.
Thank you, Sonia. Now, I think that's really important, and we've noticed that with the primary school ages as well. That silence, that space for quiet, I think is really important in making those spaces available. I think we've got a question from Heidi. I'd be very grateful for views on what is the best way to make church toddler groups distinctively Christian. Is it useful to have a Bible story? I know we've mentioned about the fact that we saw, well, if you see the Bible story as the only thing, you know, we're not happy. But if anybody wants to jump in and help Heidi, that, you know, how do we manage with a Bible story? I might pick, I know there's some real experts here who, yeah, whether they want to jump in and share how they've done, yeah, that. Beth, do you want to jump in and just say? Oh, Joanne, Joe.
I was speaking with a toddler group leader the other week, and she said it's easier to read a story than to be kind. And sometimes people think doing a Bible story, that's the Christian bit or the God slot. When actually I love the fact in the research that it's the whole holistic thing that is the spiritual flourishing and nurturing. And I think sometimes toddler group leaders can feel very judged if they don't have a Bible story for not being Christian. I find that really difficult.
Mm-hmm. I think
Ronnie,
yeah.
It's really simple, but if it's a church toddler group, I really think that the minister needs to be there, and that could be the only distinctive Christian mark there. That just getting to know the people on the ground, the mums and the parents and the au pairs and whoever it is who's got the child today, it cannot be underrated. And I know some congregations don't like that, because I faced criticism myself when I was in ministry for doing that. But it is the best way, and not to be there to do the preachy bit, but just to be there to help, you know, to muck in with the kids, to play, to model what it's like to be present. One of the ministers, I really, I wasn't able to do the research, but one of the ministers talked about how this is about relationships. It's the beginning of faith. It's not about overt Christian language. It's about being, which is incarnational ministry, if your vicar needs a proper term for it. But I think that's just so important, and not enough clergy are there. And that would really, really underpin how the volunteers feel about the group as well.
I think Steph was, oh, sorry.
And a report to your church annual meeting from the toddler group, because everybody else does a report and hardly ever the toddler group does, just to raise its profile.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Steph.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, just to reinforce what you were saying there, Ronnie. We used to, my hubby and I used to run our church toddler group, and he would go along every single session. It always took time out of his whatever he was doing to be at the toddler group, because literally that is where the community were coming together. So why would you not be there? But actually what that does is it tells the volunteers, it lets them know that they're really valued. They're valued enough for the vicar to be there. And it also says to your community that they are valued, because the guy who is perceived to be the person who is really important is showing up, basically. So it is, I agree, it's absolutely really important. But the other thing that did was it opened up really precious conversations that perhaps some of the parents and carers wouldn't have had with anybody else, but they gave them the opportunity to chat to the minister. But then it also opened up other conversations around baptism and marriage as well. And actually, pre the toddler group, I think pre our toddler group starting and my husband coming along to that as the vicar, I think the number of baptisms, and this is not a measure by any means, it more than tripled because of those conversations that people were able to have. So that's just on that. But the other thing that I'd just like to add in around the spiritual flourishing of the children, I'm a great believer in allowing children to play with God. So that can take place in the whole of the session. And we did actually have a story and song time where we did a Bible story, or not necessarily a Bible story, but a faith Christian related story at the end of the session. But it was always played with as opposed to read. So we used a puppet, which we called Wiggle. He was a Bible bookworm, and from that, we not only used a puppet, but we used worship scarves and dance scarves as well, and they all came out, and the children were just able to be really expressive in those times. So they were a little bit structured, but they also gave opportunity for the children and parents to kind of express themselves as well around all of that. And the other thing I would say about that too is that my husband always stayed on for that part too, so it gave the helpers and volunteers confidence, because they felt they were able to sort of offer that spiritual and Christian input at the end of a session, because sometimes I think it's hard for volunteers to do that. They've not quite got the confidence to do it, but as you said in your research, it's not, that slot isn't the be all and end all, because it is happening all the way through the session. But I think, again, another one of the things that I would say is that the welcome, I think children and parents and carers knowing that they are really welcomed, that they are loved and accepted, no matter who, what, or where they come from, as when they walk into that space, that they are loved and accepted unconditionally right there and right then. And that is a really, I think that speaks oodles into people's situations and lives as well. Sorry, I started waffling on there.
That's brilliant what you're saying there, and that, just picking up on some of the points that have been made, and us going into these places. What we found was, actually, we were quite lucky. We saw ministers present in all of the church toddler groups that we went into, which was great. What we did find, though, it was very rarely that the minister would feel comfortable in engaging with the children, and sometimes even with the parents. We saw the minister there as a presence, but quite often talking with the volunteers and with the toddler group leader. Why we noticed it was in one toddler group, the minister did come in and straight away was down playing cars with a group of the children, was engaging with them, which was bringing the parents in. And it was just such a different way of approaching that group. And the minister was accepted completely, absolutely loved. And the way in which he was approached by the parents, because he had gone to the children first, was incredible, really powerful. We found that really helpful. And what we did find in terms of the Bible story, and I think it's right, it's easy to read a Bible story than show kindness, but without a fail, with every parent that we asked, why have you chosen a church toddler group? It wasn't because of the Bible story. It wasn't because of the worship songs. It was because of the hospitality, because of the genuine care, because of the love that was shown and their sense of belonging. They were the important things that the families coming into these places were saying was why they chose it. And some of the parents, in fact, although they sat and listened to the Bible stories with their children, you could tell some of them it didn't relate to their lives. And so, you know, how are we engendering that spiritual flourishing in all people? When some of those that are coming into the toddler group don't actually really relate to Bible stories.
So we've got Heidi. It's got her hand up. Heidi.
Hi, yes, it was me who asked that question. I totally agree with everything that people have said about what are the most important things to be Christian distinctive, and it is about that welcome, it is about that relationships. But I'm in a toddler group at the moment that has a story time, but it's a secular story, and that feels a shame to me, because we have some great stories. But I hear what you've just said, that it's how those are related to the lives of people that is genuinely really challenging. So I'm torn about whether they're right to include or not. So I will continue to listen to the debate. Thank you.
Deborah, I think. You're mute, Deborah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, good. Okay. I love everything that's been presented and all the comments that have been made. There's this little piece missing that was referenced, and it started with when you talked about children take us into their inner world. And for me, that's the place where spiritual flourishing is building for the child. And so I'm thinking this last Sunday, we started this thing called the Loose Parts Laboratory here in Minnesota. And it's just a place of recycled material. And we invited teachers to come and take the materials back to their classrooms. And this last Sunday, a group of people who just started a new Jewish early childhood Reggio inspired program came, and they were so excited. It's like I think a step that's really important in helping ministry and parents and teachers and nannies and whoever understand that place that children go to is to have them play with the materials themselves, to play with beautiful stuff or nature materials, so that they can understand it's not just the children who can go to those beautiful places. We can also go there. We forget that we too need wonder, awe, and joy in our lives. So I just dropped that in.
I think that's really important, Deborah. And I think one of the things that, you know, in the work we've done on spiritual flourishing is how much adults need to rediscover. I think in one of the works we were doing, we were talking about like reigniting, you know, adults, you know, memories of spirituality, of bringing that back in, and sitting down and playing with the child and going into the child's inner world is so important there. Is there any other questions? And we've only got probably 9 minutes left if we look into. You're mute, Anne.
I'll just go to this one then, which is very quick, because this was one of the challenges that we found. Many of the families attending the toddler groups have little knowledge or understanding of the Christian faith and of biblical stories, which we've touched on really. So how do we provide an environment that supports the spiritual flourishing of all? And I think we've started to naturally go into that in discussion, that it isn't just about the children, it's primarily, but the families as well. How do we engage with them?
I think one of the ways we saw from the research was that sense of community, that relational, the importance of that, and that starting with community. But I know some of the clergy, and particularly some of those who saw the toddler group as a missional opportunity, they want to move on the next step. And it's how do we move, and how do we engage families? Sonia.
Okay.
I mean, surely it's partly seeing where people's needs are at and meeting their needs in that, you know, so I think, you know, it's the classic, isn't it? Actually, if what they're needing is food right now, if what they're needing is food and warmth, I mean, you're going to be looking at different communities and different places, but if food and warmth is what's needed, then that's what needs providing. And from that, you can then build on the spiritual. But I think it's about really knowing your community and your group and what their need is. I mean, I hear that it, you know, vicars may say their need is that they need a Christian faith, but actually I think we need to be maybe first of all meeting some of other needs. Does that make sense? I think, you know, if you're in, I certainly think of some of the communities around here where there are toddler groups, actually where it really works is where they've got to know them in their community, and they're running pantries, or they're running food banks, or they're running, you know, resources for people to be able to come and borrow clothes or toys or, you know, whatever. Actually, those needs are needed to be met first, I think. And then people are in a place where they're able to hear other things.
Thank you, Sonia. I think we've got Emily next.
Yeah, hi. Really, this is from personal experience. I had 3 children under 3 and a 5-year-old. So going to toddler groups was a real like just respite for me. And one of the things that I don't think people realise was showing me a lot of Christian faith was just, you know, somebody coming over and offering me a cup of tea. So I didn't have to get up and make it. The actual physical, somebody saying they could see my need, they saw I had a lot of very small children, and they came over and responded to my need. And I think that that's really the way to kind of, you know, build those relationships in order to build the spiritual flourishing of the young children, is also to make sure that you're making sure the adults' physical and spiritual needs are being met. But more importantly for me in that situation was to have a hot cup of tea that hadn't gone cold on the side of the table. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, Emily. It really does, because we had a few of the parents say, where else can I go where I get made a cup of tea and someone picks my baby up and looks after them for me so I can have a chat. It's and you know, they're practical things, but they're important things when you're a young mum.
Yeah, and it's just really, for me, it just showed me that somebody else cared, and it just gave me that time to focus on other things and not just, you know, the housework, but just have somebody look after my needs as well was really important.
Thank you.
Right, I think we've just got about 4 minutes left, and I'm going to put in the chat our evaluation form. Please, you know, feel free to fill it in here. It'll also be emailed out when we've got the link to the recorded as well for you to have.
I think then it, you know, unless there's any other questions, and please do raise questions or contribute anything that you're thinking at this time, because as I say, it does help us. We've got all of you here, you're experts in your own right, and we want to listen to that. But if there isn't anything, we'll go on to our poem, which I think is very powerful.
Can I just say something really quickly?
Yes, do.
Picking up on this need for community, toddler groups are a brilliant way to bring community together and meet a need in the community. But you can also kind of expand that and provide other opportunities to bring community together. So just for example, some of our mums at the toddler group that we were running, they had older children as well, and they were wondering how they could come together as community with those children too. So one of the things, and it was really easy to arrange, that we did was hosting a games night, a tabletop games night, where families, all families could come. So there was games for younger children and games for older children, including teenagers as well. And we managed to kind of bring, you know, large numbers of people together that still offering that community that welcome and that community, but not just with the toddler groups. It was another opportunity to bring that community together, but in a different way. So that is perhaps another way that you could just take, offer that same. I know it's not about spirituality of young children, but it's that need for young families to come together. I think, yeah.
Yeah, and building community is so important, isn't it, of all ages? So no, that's really important. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's that sense of belonging, that building that sense of belonging so that people feel that they really belong is really important. And it does, you do see the need for those in church toddler groups when they move on, the reluctance to leave the church toddler group when they've got no need to go back there because their children are in school. And we came across that a few times, that, where would they go, when the children were in school? Well, thank you so much for contributing to this, and thank you so much for all of you. For many of you have been part of this research over the last 2 years. As I say, we promise we will get this report finished and get it out in the spring, and hopefully then disseminate it further and do some work on showing people how much the church toddler groups are valued, and showing people within the church and outside the church the valuable work that everybody is doing. And I think one of the vicars in one of our research projects shared this poem with me and said, I think that you need to read this. I love Malcolm Guite's work anyway. And I think it is those unsung people who are doing this every week that we really need to value and to make them aware of how much they're valued. So I'll just finish with reading this as we go. And blessed are the ones we overlook, the faithful servers on the coffee rota. I've just lost my slide. The faithful servers on the coffee rota, the ones who hold no candle, bell or book, but keep the books and tally up the quota. The gentle souls who come to do the flowers, the quiet ones who organise the fete, church sitters who give up their weekday hours, doorkeepers who may open heaven's gate. God knows the depths that often go unspoken amongst the shy, the quiet and the kind, or the slow healing of a heart long broken, placing each flower so for a year's mind, invisible on earth without a voice. In heaven their angels glory and rejoice. And I just thought that's a lovely poem to speak to the volunteers who work often unsung in the church toddler groups. We will be, Bob hopefully will be sorting out this recording and putting it in a link so that we can share it with you, and we'll share again the evaluation form with you. But thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We wouldn't be able to do this without the support of so many people on this call who've really worked really hard and helped us and shared with us so openly of their work.